Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have as our distinguished guest, Fiona McEntee, an immigration lawyer from Chicago area, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Well, based in Chicago, but not originally. Yeah. And,
we want to explore, she had some tremendous growth in her practice in the last 6 years, even when COVID was going on. And I want to talk about that. Some things she planned, some things she didn't plan. So first of all, we can tell from your that you're not from Chicago, and I would you say you're from the United States. So tell us your journey, where you're from, and how did you end up in America, and the whole law school deal, and how you got to where you are now. Just give us your story.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Ken. We both have accents, I guess. Everyone's always asking me. They're like, where's your accent from? And I'm like, the same place that I'm from. We're both from Dublin. So yeah, I grew up in Dublin. I never really, ever thought I would end up moving to America. But when I was in college, I was studying a bachelor's of civil law. So outside the US, it's pretty common to be able to go straight in to study your law at the bachelor's level. And so that's what I was doing. And there was an opportunity to do a study abroad exchange program, and they picked me, and there were a few of us together to go to Chicago. So that's how I ended up in Chicago. So we came over, and because we were studying at the bachelor's level, we were much younger. So I was 20 when I first moved to the US, and we're in law school at DePaul, studying along with everybody else. So we were there for a year, and then I actually worked in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office during the summer. And then I moved back to Ireland. I finished my bachelor's of civil law international, and then started the application process to come back to the US. So I think the ABA can give you up to a year's credit for a foreign law degree. So I was able, but I still have to take the LSAT. The LSAT was my very first standardized test that I'd ever taken in my whole life. So I was like, what is this, like multiple choice? Like, we don't do those tests. So I had to go over to London. I took the LSAT, and then I came back to do my JD that I was able to do in 2 years from Chicago, Kent. So that's kind of how I ended up in America, really, originally.
Okay, and how'd you end up in immigration law?
So, that's kind of a funny story. I'm like laughing when I think about it, because my dad's nickname for me since I've been a kid has been Save the Whales. He's always called, because I was always fighting for the rights of the environment or the unions in Ireland. And so that was kind of, a big part of our dinner conversations. So that was my nickname from my dad. So I didn't really think about immigration in Ireland back then in early 2000s. It wasn't a distinct practice area the way it is today. And so I never really thought of it as an option. But when I came back to go to do my Juris Doctor, I saw it on the list, and I was like, that's kind of checking my Save the Whaley type box, and I'm an immigrant here now, I guess. And so I just thought I would take the class and see. And it was almost instantly, I just realized, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so during law school at Kent, there were multiple immigration classes, and there were also 2 immigration clinics. One was a pro bono immigration clinic in Pilsen, a predominantly Spanish-speaking neighborhood in Chicago. So I worked there. And then the other one was more like a business immigration clinic through the law offices in Kent. So I left law school with actually quite a lot of immigration experience, and kind of knew that that's what I was going to do.
Yeah. And so did you go out and work with another firm, or did you just hang a shingle?
Yeah, no, I went to work with, because also being an immigrant as well, having to deal with that whole, what you do, a post-student visa and stuff was something that I personally experienced. So I went to work for a very high volume immigration law firm, where I got the most amazing training. Like someone had described 1 year of practice there as being equivalent to about 7 or 8 years in a general kind of immigration firm, because of the way the system was set up. It was very tech forward in terms of like the platform. They had their own proprietary system. And so I was there for about 2 years and got incredible training. And then after that, I decided that I would, set up my own practice.
Yeah. So how did you start out marketing? I mean, how did you get cases? How did that start?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's like you think you're going to open your firm and like people are going to be, banging down your door, like to, it was just, what, it was like a lot of like relationship building, a lot of networking, a lot of like stuff that I was doing kind of anyway, but like sincerely doing, I'm not the kind of person to just go out and be like handing all out your business, making sincere connections, doing a lot of like stuff, like putting time into community organizations, serving on boards of, I was on the board of what's now known as Chicago Irish Immigrant Services, like a community-based social services organization. I was on the board of the AILA Network Chicago. So like serving on boards, putting time in, putting the work in, building, connections and genuine relationships with people, and obviously helping other people out along the way as much as I could too. So just a lot of that kind of stuff. And like Women's Bar Association, because I was a solo, attorney, but I also didn't grow up here. So I didn't have that like network of kind of just college friends or people like that. So I didn't have any of that. So I was also treated really well being an Irish immigrant in the city of Chicago. There were so many people that were, a lot of judges I know and people I met maybe when I worked in the state's attorney's office who were very kind to me and very, welcoming and wanting to kind of pay it forward, maybe that as maybe their ancestors had been, hopefully welcomed to Chicago in the same way. So there was a lot of that as well that happened.
Yeah. So, and I guess you were going along and making a living, but not really that big a growth, just like, 5%, 10%, something like that.
Yeah, because for years it was just me. So, I had kids then, and I was working from home, but I had an office address, and I was happy enough with the status quo as it was. But then I think kind of a critical point was like my brother came out, who was a qualified lawyer in Ireland, moved out to the US to work for my firm. We kind of were just brainstorming one, when he was over visiting, and, I was like, why don't you move here and, work with me and we'll build the firm. And I just kind of threw it out there. And so he's like, oh, we kind of revisited and thought that's not a terrible idea. So he came out. So he was a qualified lawyer in Ireland, but wasn't licensed yet here. So he came and was like a clerk for me. And then he, was studying for the California bar that he was able to take as a foreign licensed attorney. So then he passed that. So then we were kind of in an odd situation in a way where we had 2 attorneys, but no other staff, which I think probably, I don't know what other people do, but I would imagine maybe some firms are set up like that, but maybe a lot of people, their first hire is a paralegal or something like that. Whereas we kind of had 2 attorneys. And so, at some point then we grew beyond that, but for a long time it was just me, and then Ray came out and was myself and Ray together, and then when we started growing pretty quickly, I think.
So what is it that made you? What was it? What happened? How did you grow? How many people do you have now?
There's about 14 of us in total. So yeah, which is big for immigration. A lot of times immigration is done in either in kind of bigger firms or in solo kind of type practice settings. What happened? A lot of things happened, I think, probably in and around the same time. I think, we did have an election, not to get political, but elections impact immigration. And I would say that the election of previous President Trump was kind of a pivotal point in terms of our immigration practice. And so shortly after that is when we hired our first employee. And I think like a lot of growth kind of happened from there. I think being able to hire somebody and realizing how much it freed me up to do other things, you know, then enabled further growth, and it kind of just continued on from there.
Yeah. And tell me about the Muslim deal, because you've been on MSNBC, you've been all over, you're published. You're like a national celebrity almost now.
And yourself, Ken. Yeah, I'm in good company. So the MSNBC thing and all that stuff happened really, you know, I've told the story a few times and I always remember it so vividly, but essentially like the morning of like the Muslim ban had been written, you know, the night before that morning, we had signed up to be on like an ad hoc on-call list from this big refugee organization. And basically that morning we woke up and it was like, go to the airport now. And I got like chills down my spine. I was like, what? We had no idea what to expect, what was happening, what was going on. But we ended up carpooling with random attorneys that had also volunteered. Ray and I picked them up on the way. And as Ray was driving, I just was like, a friend of mine worked for one of the big newspapers here, nothing to do with immigration. But I said, I'll just ring her and tell her what's going on. I don't know what we're going to meet or what's going to happen, but I'll call her and see. So I rang her and I explained, and she's like, okay, let me see if they have a reporter on call on Saturday. She's like, let me just pass this on to him. So he called me, and then I said, we're on our way to the airport. And he's like, okay, I'll meet you there. So as we were one of the first attorneys to arrive at O'Hare, and Ray and I were we were the only immigration attorneys that were there. There were other attorneys that had been signed up to volunteer, but they were not immigration attorneys. So we kind of started leading the team there. And then the reporter came, was like, where's Fiona? And so then I basically ended up becoming the ad hoc like media spokesperson for the group. And ended up working with a client, a man who was waiting for his wife and his baby, who had been detained now. The hour initially, he's like, I don't know where they are, because they were mid-air when the ban was signed and stuff. And this lady was a green card holder, and the child was a US citizen, so should not have been subject to any bans at all. However, CBP, which is, you know, the immigration officers, they were so confused. They were saying to us, like, we were given no notice. We have no idea what to do. We don't know what's happening. And it was just chaos. So the media stuff kind of happened because of that initial, you know, reporter and me being the immigration attorney. And then so it started with just like some, you know, interviews with like newspapers. That's just like, oh, hey, can you just speak into this microphone? Fine. Who, you know, we can all do that. Right. And then it's like news cameras started arriving. They're like, can we just record a clip of you and we can edit it later? Okay, fine. You know, it had to feel like I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then NBC in Chicago were like, our New York affiliate MSNBC wants to do like a live interview with you on camera. Like, you're going to have like an earpiece in your ear. And I was like, what? Oh God, I wasn't prepared for that. Like, but how could I say no, right? There was a woman who needed me, her baby. Like, I had just come through the airport as a mom a few weeks before from Ireland. It was just after Christmas that I had come back, you know, and I felt like, I have to do this. And so I ended up doing, like, when I look back at the interview, I'm like a deer in headlights. There's protesters running in front. There's like all sorts. There's like hundreds of people at the airport. And I ended up doing like an interview that was like over 8 minutes long, like live on the news. And, you know, it was just chaotic. And then, so that was my first taste of like doing a media interview with zero training, no idea what I was doing, could barely hear what was being said, you know, didn't really know what was even happening from a legal point of view. We had no idea what we were even, you know, I don't think anyone had really dealt with that type of legal situation before either. So it was unprecedented for so many reasons.
Yeah. And so I would take it that after that, your business really got like going crazy, right?
Well, I mean, the first thing, yeah, kind of, but not necessarily it wasn't like, oh, we got like massive amounts of corporate clients because they saw me on MSNBC. It wasn't necessarily that. It was just the volume of emails that us immigration attorneys started getting through listservs and things. Like, I think we got something like an additional 5,000 emails per day, like from when all this happened, because there were listservs and all these groups and all this stuff started happening. So shortly after that is when we hired our first a law clerk at the time. She was a first year law student. And we knew we were going to be litigating the Muslim ban as well, which we took some pro bono litigation to federal court here. And so, you know, I was like, hey, you know, we're probably going to be suing over this. You know, how do you feel about that? And she's like, where do I sign up? Sign me up, you know? So, but yeah, so it was kind of realizing like, okay, we could probably do with some help for some of these other things. And we had recently enough kind of settled on an office space. So, because previously we had, for the most part, been working from home, which I know everybody is now, but this was years ago when people weren't really doing that. And so, yeah, so kind of making that decision to hire based on really just being overwhelmed with just information, not necessarily like tons of business clients overnight or anything. But yeah, so it all kind of went from there, really.
Yeah. And you also have written a book, right? A children's book.
Yes, I have. Actually, my second book came out yesterday, but yes, my first book was it's a traditional print book, a children's book on immigration called Our American Dream.
Good. And your second one, what was that about?
It's about US immigration options for startups. So that's kind of a niche practice area of mine, is doing a lot of like work in relation to startup immigration. I do a lot of advocacy, writing, media stuff, congressional kind of liaising work, trying to get Congress to pass a startup visa. And so that came out today.
So what is a startup visa?
So, okay, think of like a startup that is, when I think of a startup, it's obviously, it's a company that's been founded, but generally you think of something that is getting outside funding from the likes of a venture capitalist or an angel investor. And the idea is that it's a high growth, like high potential company. You know, like if you think of like the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, like they started out as a startup and that probably took on funding, and like they have this huge potential to give 100x times the value of the investment. That's why venture capitalists invest in startups, because they have this potential to really scale really high. You know, when we think of the US immigration system, it's important to note that really the laws have not been updated by Congress in over 30 years. So we are dealing with laws that are that old, and laws that you know, Congress didn't, there weren't startups around when Congress created the immigration laws. So obviously there's no laws for a startup. But I just published a piece and I wrote an op-ed with some friends of mine, immigration lawyers from Canada and from the UK, and it was published in Crane's Chicago Business. And it was essentially looking at the immigration options that they have in their countries and comparing the systems that we have in the US. And basically we are stuck in a 30-year time war. Meanwhile, other countries are constantly updating and modernizing their immigration system to attract the best and brightest and these amazing entrepreneurs, these immigrant founders that are already coming to the US. And then if they don't have an option post student visa or whatever else other visa they're on, well, then we risk losing them. And these great startups with their amazing, you know, potential to have these jobs in the US, you know, that's what's at stake here. So it's basically the work that I do is trying to explain this to people, because people are really surprised when they hear about this. They can't believe that how outdated our immigration system is. So this is kind of I think it's just such a low hanging fruit. It's like a no brainer. But unfortunately, you know, everything immigration is very partisan, and it just doesn't have to be this way. There's definitely things that we can come together and we can agree on these types of things. And a startup visa is one that has gotten some bipartisan support over the years, but just not enough to get a startup visa passed through Congress.
Yeah. So I think our listeners and our viewers, there's a bunch of takeaways from this. And one of them is that free publicity is worth millions. I mean, you can't pay millions to get what you got for that 8 minutes on that TV show, MSNBC. And the fact that got you into other things, and now you're like published in Crane's. I mean, you know, the big and another thing that people need to understand in listening to you, you kind of niched out and I've always said there's riches and niches. What I mean is, when you specialize in, even though there's broad immigration, just like for PI law firms, there's broad personal injury. But if you can niche in like just trucking accidents or motorcycle accidents, or like what you're doing, just startups, your authority figure standing is higher. Your thought that this is the expert, even though you don't use the word expert.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of things to learn from what you've done, Fiona. I mean, really. And whether you intentionally tried it or not, the deal is, you know, you've seen some tremendous growth here. You went from 2 to 14 people, you know, that's pretty big in an immigration practice, especially because, like you said, most of them are solos or either big transactional firms that just got it as a little part of their business.
Right.
You know, so there's a lot of stuff to be learned from you.
Thank you.
Know, our listeners, and the fact that I know that another thing too is that it's what I've always taught my kids is if you got something you got a passion for, we can figure out how to make money. You'll make, you know, because you got to enjoy what you do. And I can tell that you are Save the Whales girl. I mean, you remind me of my wife. You know, she's out there for the underdog. You know, and she did Social Security disability her whole life.
Yeah,
well, she wanted to help the less fortunate. You know.
Yeah.
So and I see that. You know, and if you do something you love, you know, I never would have got. You never need to practice law if it's an area that you don't like, because life's too short, I think.
Completely. Yeah, I agree with that so much. And I think that, you know I heard you speak about the untimely passing of somebody that you knew who was pretty young. And I mean, my cousin passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, and he was very close to me. And he was a photographer and had his own business and loved what he did. And that's what I always say, like, nobody knows what's around the corner. And I think that, like, we need to be doing stuff that's fulfilling and that we are passionate about. And I think it's also like the work that I because I was here as an international student myself, and because I've worked with literally thousands of international students over the years, like that's how I kind of started developing my niche within like immigration, startup immigration. And our firm does all types of immigration, but this is my lane completely. And I know this area like inside out and out. And I think because I love it so much, you know, like I spent last weekend, I wrote 2 other op-eds that I'm trying to, the Cranes one was finalized and published, and another one that I'm pitching out nationally. But I've also been published in USA Today, which is one of the biggest, it's the most widely read publication and that was specifically on international students and on work permits for international students. And I love this so much, and I find it very easy to, I mean, don't get me wrong, it takes time, and it takes, you know, you think an op-ed is 800 words. How long can that take? That can take a long time. But the authority that you get from getting your name and your opinion in places like this, there's so much to be said for it. And I'm trying to use this to help make a difference and to help change some of these things. And I would much rather the piece like be in something where you're more likely to get readers with all different viewpoints reading it and thinking, I never really thought about immigration in that way. And maybe we don't have to be always against, you know, we can, you know, I'm not trying to be all like, everybody come together and let's agree on everything. But I firmly believe that there are pieces of immigration, like we that we can agree on. And I think this is one of those things. But I think if you're passionate about something, you end up I want to write about these things, and so I'm not necessarily doing it for business reasons, but it also, you know, it's a passion of mine, and it also does help with business as well.
Oh, yeah. I can tell you, it helps tremendously. I got quoted in the newspaper many years ago, when they had to recall Oxycontin and different things like that. I've got like 30 calls the next day, you know, people wanting to hire us to represent their loved ones or whatever. So, yeah, you know, and it was only like 3 sentences. I mean, that was it. But it was in the biggest local paper in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is pretty big distribution. So, yeah, it was on, you know, front page. So it made a big deal. So, yeah. But I just think there's a lot of things to learn from this. And another thing, too, is like I just got a text this morning from a friend, and they're like really killing all the PI laws down in Florida, and I'm sitting there thinking, immigration is not a bad practice. I mean, and you're really helping people. And, and I think land condemnation, I think the PI lawyers have got to be thinking about, you got to always be thinking a step ahead of what's going to happen. But like I said, you got to do what you love to do, but you also got to feed your family too. So you got to figure out how to do both.
Yeah, definitely.
But I can figure out a way to make money if it's something that you love to do. There's usually a way to leverage it somehow. You might not get rich, but you can pay your bills, live comfortable. That's what it's all about. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, good deal. Anything else I should have asked you that I did not ask you today?
I don't know. Oh my gosh, where to start? No, I feel like we covered a lot about like the start of immigration, which is like the niche of mine, the growth. I think it's just, the importance of like having a great team in terms of culture. Like that's something that we've done really well. We have a great employee retention. We have, we're very deliberate about recruiting people that are aligned with our core values. We end up attracting like a lot of like people that feel the same way that we do about these things. And so we really have like quite low turnover. And we've had, I think that that's so important to growth as well, that you're really treating your team well and that you're making it an enjoyable place to work, because what's the point in growing if you're constantly having to like keep hiring like new people? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? And so for us, like being Irish European, like this culture of having time off, is really important to us. We close the firm completely from Christmas Eve to like New Year's Day, and everybody gets paid holidays off during that time. We have like very generous time off policy, and it's kind of something that we wanted to do to make sure that people feel appreciated and rested and can kind of work in harmony together. And I think that when you're thinking about growth and kind of who you want on your team, I think having your core values and being so deliberate and intentional about that is important, because otherwise I think you're just wasting time constantly hiring and training kind of new people.
I would agree. I think I've always said that no great business was ever built on the back of average employees. You've got to have really good, and I was talking to a lawyer last week in Charlotte, and I'm saying, everybody's got to be aligned. You got to be aligned. You got to have the same, as far as the partners, you got to have the same vision. And you got to have the same core values, and then you got to hire people. And if you got those core values, then it's sort of like our ethics rules. We know what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
If you live by the core values, about every question anybody's got in your office, they can go to your core values and figure out the answer. They really can. If you think about it. If you did them right, I mean, whatever they might be. I mean, you look at Pilma, I mean, ours is like, we look after each other. We look after our members. We look after each other. That tells you a lot right there. What I'm saying is that one sentence could answer thousands of questions.
Yeah.
We look after each other. We look after our members. We look after each other. We got each other's back. That's what you want in a workplace.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, good deal. So if anybody wants to get your autograph or talk to you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh yeah, so I'm available for autographs. Hopefully more when we finally get the startup visa law passed. That will be a cause for celebration. So our law firm is McEntee Law Group. So we're obviously on the website. I mean, I feel like every single platform imaginable I'm on, but my handle on like a lot of things is US Visa Lawyer. So Twitter and Instagram, and I'm actually on TikTok, which only just starting that, so not doing dancing. But everywhere. Actually, LinkedIn is I think probably one of the best ways to be for attorneys. I get tons of business and referrals and stuff from LinkedIn, and I always share like the pieces that I've written, and sharing. I think that's like a lot of people I've read that people are consuming content on LinkedIn, but not necessarily creating it. And like, it's such a good place for attorneys to be kind of hanging out. And so I would say if people are listening and want to find me on LinkedIn, I would be happy to connect there.
Yeah, I actually looked at your LinkedIn before I interviewed you today.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay,
right.
I'll find you.
All right. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.